The dust hung low over the shattered village, mixing with smoke and the sharp smell of burned metal. The SEAL team moved fast, boots crunching over debris, eyes scanning windows and rooftops with practiced calm. They had been inserted to extract a trapped family and destroy a weapons cache, but nothing ever stayed simple for long. At the edge of the formation ran Captain Leah Morgan, a combat nurse attached to the unit for the mission. Her helmet looked too big for her narrow shoulders, and the red cross patch on her gear made her stand out. She had heard the whispers before deployment, jokes that she was just a nurse, someone to patch wounds, not survive a firefight. The first shots cracked from the far end of the street, snapping against walls and kicking up stone chips. The SEALs reacted instantly, spreading out and returning controlled fire. Leah felt her heart slam hard against her ribs, but her hands stayed steady as she dropped behind a half-collapsed wall with two operators. One of them glanced at her and shouted for her to stay low. His voice wasn't unkind, just firm, as if he were reminding himself of a rule drilled into him long ago. Protect the medic. Protect the nurse. A blast echoed nearby, close enough to make Leah's ears ring. A young operator went down, clutching his leg as blood soaked through his uniform. Training took over. Leah crawled to him without hesitation, ignoring the rounds snapping overhead. She pressed her hands to the wound, applying pressure, talking to him calmly, telling him to breathe, telling him he would be fine even as she worked fast. Around her, the team shifted positions, trying to pin down the shooters who had them boxed in. More enemy fire rained in, heavier now, coordinated. The wall behind Leah cracked as bullets chewed into it. One of the SEALs grabbed her by the vest and shoved her deeper behind cover. "Stay here," he ordered. "We'll handle it." For a brief second, she saw doubt flicker in his eyes, not about her skill, but about whether this cover would hold. As she finished stabilizing the wounded man, Leah looked around. The radio chatter was tense. They were outnumbered, and their planned exit route was compromised. Another SEAL fell back beside her, breathing hard, his rifle jammed. He cursed and started working the action, but incoming fire forced him to duck. In the chaos, his weapon slipped from his grip and landed near Leah's knee. She stared at the rifle for a moment longer than she should have. Memories flooded her mind, not of hospitals, but of long nights in training ranges, of instructors who insisted that every member of a unit, medic or not, had to know how to fight. She had qualified, trained, learned to shoot not to be heroic, but to survive. Still, no one ever expected her to need it like this. Another explosion shook the ground. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Leah tightened her jaw. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about getting everyone home. She reached out and pulled the rifle toward her, checking it with quick, practiced movements. The SEAL beside her noticed and froze, surprise written across his face. Before he could say a word, Leah leaned out just enough to see the muzzle flashes down the street. Fear was there, sharp and real, but it didn't control her. She took a steady breath, braced herself behind the broken wall, and prepared to do far more than anyone had expected from just a nurse. Leah squeezed the trigger, and the rifle kicked back into her shoulder with a force she had only felt during training. The sound was louder than she remembered, sharp and final, cutting through the chaos of gunfire around her. She adjusted her stance, just like she had been taught, leaning into the recoil, eyes focused down the sight. Her first burst was controlled, aimed at the source of the muzzle flashes. One of the enemy shooters ducked back behind cover, surprised by the sudden accuracy coming from a position they had assumed was non-threatening. The SEAL next to her stared for half a second too long before snapping back into action. He covered her flank, shouting positions to the rest of the team over the radio. The dynamic shifted almost immediately. Where the enemy fire had been aggressive and confident, it now became hesitant, scattered. Leah moved with calm purpose, firing only when she had a clear line, conserving ammunition, just as she had been drilled to do. Smoke burned her lungs as she changed position slightly, keeping low. Another SEAL crawled over, wide-eyed. "Didn't know nurses came like this," he muttered, half disbelief, half respect. Leah didn't answer. Her focus stayed forward. She wasn't thinking about labels or pride. She was thinking about angles, about protecting the wounded man behind her, about buying the team enough time to regroup. Enemy fighters tried to push closer, using doorways and rubble for cover. Leah tracked the movement, firing short bursts that forced them back. Her hands were steady, even though her heart raced. Training and instinct blended together until the noise faded into something distant, manageable. She became aware of the radio crackling with new orders. An alternate extraction point had been identified, but they needed to move fast. One of the SEALs shouted that they were low on ammo. Leah glanced down and realized her magazine was nearly empty too. She signaled with her hand, then reached for another magazine from a fallen enemy rifle nearby, checking it quickly before locking it in. The SEALs noticed. Their expressions changed, not just surprise now, but trust. As the team began to move, covering one another, Leah shifted from firing to advancing, then back again. She paused only when another operator stumbled, hit in the shoulder. She dropped beside him instantly, rifle set down, hands already working to stop the bleeding. Bullets cracked overhead, but she didn't flinch. The SEALs formed a tight protective circle around her this time, returning the favor without being told. "Good to go," she said after securing the bandage, grabbing the rifle again before anyone could object. They moved together down the street, step by step, pushing through resistance that was now breaking apart. The enemy had not expected this level of coordination, especially not from the person they had dismissed as a non-combatant. By the time they reached the edge of the village, the firing faded behind them. A helicopter thudded in the distance, its sound growing louder with every second. Leah finally let herself breathe a little deeper, muscles burning, adrenaline still flooding her system. She caught a few looks from the team, quiet nods of acknowledgement that said more than words ever could. She was still a nurse, still there to save lives. But today, she had done something else too. And as the helicopter came into view, it was clear that none of them would ever think of her as just anything again. The helicopter lifted off as the village shrank beneath them, smoke still curling from the streets they had just fought through. Inside the cabin, the noise was deafening, but the tension slowly eased. Leah sat on the metal floor, back against the wall, rifle resting across her knees. Her gloves were stained with blood and dust, and her arms trembled now that the danger had passed. Only now did her body allow itself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. Across from her, the wounded operators were strapped in, stable and breathing. Leah moved between them one last time, checking bandages, adjusting straps, speaking softly. So they could hear her over the roar of the rotors. This was familiar ground. This was who she was. The rifle might have saved their lives, but her hands, trained to heal, were what would carry them home. One of the SEALs broke the silence, leaning forward and meeting her eyes. "You saved us back there," he said simply. There was no exaggeration in his voice, no drama. Just truth. Another nodded in agreement. A third gave a small smile and added, "Guess, just a nurse," was never really accurate. Leah let out a quiet breath and shook her head. "I did my job," she replied. "Same as all of you." But inside, something had shifted. Not pride, not ego, but certainty. She belonged there, not as a symbol, not as an exception, as a warrior who also healed. When they landed at base, medics rushed forward, taking over care. Leah handed off her patients, giving clear, calm reports. As the stretchers rolled away, she finally removed her helmet. The cool air hit her face, and for the first time since the first shot was fired, she allowed herself to feel exhausted. She sat down on the edge of the landing zone, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. That mission would be written up in reports and briefings. Details would be classified, names would fade into files and folders. But stories have a way of surviving, passed quietly from one soldier to another. The story of the day a nurse was pushed behind cover, and instead of staying there, she stood up and fought when it mattered most. This story is not about proving anything. It's about recognizing strength where people least expect it. Courage doesn't always look loud or obvious. Sometimes it wears a red cross. Sometimes it saves lives with bandages. And sometimes, when there is no other choice, it picks up a rifle and stands the line. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you see strength differently, don't forget to support the channel. Subscribe now to Warrior Women Stories for more real, powerful stories of women who rise in the face of impossible odds. Your support helps these stories reach the world, one mission, one moment, and one warrior at a time.